Good evening. In a significant development in the Brexit debate, Jeremy Corbyn says Labour is now prepared to back another referendum to prevent what he calls a damaging Tory Brexit. Labour says that if its own conditions for a Brexit deal are not accepted by MPs, they include a comprehensive customs union with the EU, the party would then support a fresh referendum. But as our chief political correspondent Vicky Young explains, it's not clear what the terms of that referendum would be. There is some flash photography coming up.
For months, the Labour leader's been accused of dragging his feet, reluctant to swing behind another Brexit referendum, even though that's what many Labour Party members want. Tonight, he's taken a step in that direction. Jeremy Corbyn's allies say he's trying to keep the country together.
Whilst we have respected the result of the referendum and we have been trying to make sure that we leave in a sensible way, with this Prime Minister, it is really very difficult indeed.
And you would campaign to remain if we got to that point, would you?
Of course I would campaign to remain, because I do think that's what's best for Britain.
And Jeremy Corbyn?
And I think that, of course, if it was a disastrous Tory Brexit or remaining, then Jeremy would campaign to remain.
Some, though, suspect this announcement is designed to stem the flow of disgruntled MPs from the party. Most of those who left last week have been pushing for a so-called people's vote. With Brexit Day drawing closer, former colleagues think this is the right solution.
The country has been divided on Brexit. The Labour Party and the Conservatives have been divided on Brexit. I think that this plan today starts to bring the Labour Party together. Yes, let's go for a deal if you want to do that, but let's also have the option to remain. You can only do that if you take this back to the British people and draw a line under this whole sorry saga.
The campaign for a second referendum has attracted thousands to marches across the country. But for MPs representing seats in the Midlands, the north of England and parts of Wales, there's concern that Labour could be accused of betraying the will of millions of people.
I have deep reservations about the idea of a second referendum. I think it would be very divisive for our country and for our communities. I think it would have a corrosive impact on the role and sovereignty of Parliament.
This is a shift in Labour policy, but there's still confusion over some of the detail. What, for example, would be the question put in any referendum. And there's huge uncertainty over whether enough MPs would back this policy in the House of Commons. Dozens of Labour MPs in the past have said they'd be reluctant to do so. And one said tonight this policy was so damaging it would prevent Jeremy Corbyn from ever becoming Prime Minister. For months, Labour has stuck to a carefully crafted Brexit policy. Jeremy Corbyn outlined his revised plan in a parliamentary meeting with MPs and soon discovered that when you please one group, you upset another. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the Prime Minister has just returned home from Egypt, where she held talks with some EU leaders at an international summit there. Mrs May will update MPs on the latest negotiations tomorrow, and she insisted today that it was still possible to reach a deal by the 29th of March, when the UK is set to leave the EU. But one European leader warned the Prime Minister that the UK was in danger of sleepwalking into a no-deal scenario. Our political editor Laura Kunsberg was travelling with the Prime Minister. There is some flash photography coming up.
Theresa May must be rather used to grinning and bearing it by now, waiting for the cameras to leave before yet another vital conversation. And with every day more clamour for her to say she'd wait too. The Prime Minister wants to stick to the timetable, leave the EU next month. But if MPs don't say yes to a deal before then, might she let that slip?
But what I've sensed in all of my conversations with my fellow leaders here, both here in Sharm el-Sheikh and in recent days, is a real determination to find a way through which allows the UK to leave the EU in a smooth and orderly way with a deal.
If your deal is rejected again next month, which would you choose as our Prime Minister? Leaving the European Union without a deal or delaying by a couple of months?
I'm clear that what I'm working for is to ensure that we get a deal negotiated with the European Union that addresses the concern of Parliament, such that Parliament votes for that deal and we're able to leave with a deal.
She doesn't want to answer because she knows that tension waits for her at home. But more voices abroad hold out that real possibility.
I believe that in the situation we are in, an extension would be a rational solution. But Prime Minister May still believes that she's able to avoid this scenario.
When you were trying to put your spoon in, it just threw it away.
And then suddenly everybody left.
There's more to chat about than last night's buffet. To avoid that dilemma over delay, the Prime Minister still needs EU friends to give an extra legal assurance on the controversial Irish backstop that guarantees no hard border.
Again, good morning.
But patience is obviously very thin.
We are now sleepwalking into a no-deal scenario. It's absolutely unacceptable. And I think your best friends have to warn you for that. And I think I'm one of your best friends. The Netherlands is one of your best friends. So we have to be very straightforward. Wake up. This is real. Come to a conclusion and close the deal.
And finally, do you think it's now very likely there will be a delay? And if there is a delay, how long might it be?
If Theresa May would ask for a delay, I think the EU will then ask for what do you want with it. We don't want to get into this position again and go around in circles for the next couple of months.
But she's crisscrossing countries for a reason. Number 10 believes there's still a narrow way through without hesitation, with his help. At home, though, more and more Tories, including ministers, demand in the next 48 hours that the Prime Minister at least implies she'd be willing to put the brakes on Brexit rather than leave without a deal.
It's not in anybody's interest to see no deal affecting Britain in the way that we're talking about.
But there's always a different Tory force in town. A sniff of deliberate delay, a much longer process. Eurosceptics would howl with rage.
I hear again and again from people, regardless of which side they voted, that they just wanted to get on with it, to get this sorted. A delay would prolong the uncertainty. It doesn't actually resolve things.
Here and now, and back at home tonight, the Prime Minister will do anything she can to avoid saying she would choose delay rather than leaving the EU without a deal if her compromise is rejected by MPs again. No one in government is really talking about more than a couple of months of extending their political agony. But this week, the Prime Minister's problem is acute and familiar. How can she placate her party when one half of it is noisily demanding one thing, the other screaming for the opposite?
Summits can be surreal. The Prime Minister last night found herself in an impromptu pool match with the Italian leader. With so much riding on Brexit, Theresa May simply can't afford to miss a shot. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Sharm el-Sheikh.
Well, let's go live to Brussels tonight and our Europe editor, Katja Adler. Katja, when the EU talks today about good progress being made, those were the words used, are they suggesting that a deal is now within reach?
Well, Hugh, that's what Downing Street would like you to think. Certainly the Prime Minister over the last couple of days has met a number of EU leaders, and the official feedback on both sides, what these talks were constructive and positive. But on the EU side, at least, this is polite speak for saying, look, we're on the same team in so much as we want a Brexit deal. We want to get this withdrawal agreement passed. But the EU say that the Prime Minister still has not come forward with any concrete proposals how to get over that deadlock with the EU over the backstop, you know, that attempt, that guarantee to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland after Brexit. The Prime Minister is still telling EU leaders she needs changes to the backstop text, and they're insisting to her they'll make legally binding assurances that it's not a permanent solution, but there will be no changes. Privately, Hugh, EU diplomats are telling me that they think the Prime Minister is trying to run down the clock in a high-stakes game of three-way Brexit blackmail, they say, leaning on hardline Brexiteers saying support me or you could risk having no Brexit at all, leaning on Labour MPs saying support me or you could have a no-deal Brexit, and leaning on the EU saying give me more over the backstop or you could have a no-deal Brexit. Now, as the theory goes, only one of those groups would need to blink in order for the Prime Minister to get her deal passed. I wouldn't put my money on the EU blinking first. But as EU leaders tonight look at the goings-on in Westminster, they think to a certain extent, at least, the process may be taken out of the Prime Minister's hands.
Katja, many thanks again. Katja Adler, our Europe editor there in Brussels.